Back before Christianity basically won Europe, there were a bunch of little religions and cults duking it out for souls or whatever. The Gnostics were one of them. They came from all over the place, and there were a bunch of little sub-schools. Kabbalah is one of them. You might remember Madonna rocking that red bracelet thing. I'm not going to try to get into all of that. Main idea was you had the supreme benevolent deity called the monad, from which everything else would follow. It's a dualist philosophy, though, so you also got the antithesis of the monad, called the Demiurge, who was often depicted as a big fuck-off snake with a lion's head. This creator god, this Demiurge, created the material world, a deeply flawed landscape formed from chaos and sin. One of their holy texts said that this Demiurge, quote, thinks that he is supreme. His pride and incompetence have resulted in the sorry state of the world as we know it, and in the blind and ignorant condition of most of mankind. Close quote. So you have the creator of the material world, who's a douche, and then you got the great creator, who exists in a world of pure joy and truth, that we can't get into until we transcend the imperfection of the corrupt, impure material world. Flash forward to modern-day feminists. They believe in this thing called the Patriarchy. No matter what kind of feminist, choice, intersectional, second wave, latter day, whatever, this idea of an unseen, all-powerful force that created the world as we know it but is personified by pride and incompetence that oppresses our physical bodies while suppressing our divine spirit is found in every branch of feminism, every nook and cranny, bell hooks especially. The loosest, most progressive definition of patriarchy you get if you Google it is a system of society or government in which men hold the power and women are largely excluded from it. So, obviously, we in the enlightened West don't live in a society where women are specifically excluded from power, demonstrably so. Keyword here, excluded. And while women may be over or underrepresented in one job title or a political office, they're not being excluded from them any more than they're being excluded from working on power lines or taking a bachelor's in computer science. So no, there's no actual patriarchy, even by the most progressive standard, but that's not what intersectional feminists are talking about. What they're talking about is this mystical demiurge, this pathological force that molded the material world and cursed it with masculine energy. This is the ultimate truth, the revelation of feminism. That masculine energy has built the world we inhabit, but it only did so to cage our divine spirit and keep us from reaching our higher selves. You need to believe this revelation before you can perceive it. Once you perceive it, the 5 pillars of neo-progressivism become an almost religious obligation. Proving your virtue by calling out the patriarchy is what I call the neo-progressive jihad. It's not enough to simply live your life in a personal struggle against the demiurge found at the heart of feminist thinking. No. In this age of around-the-clock self-promotion, you have to be seen by your peers as fighting against this invisible, pervasive, and of course, ultimately fictional nemesis. This is how neo-progressives baptize themselves, and the faith demands they do it regularly, constantly. Jihad refers not just to acts of violence carried out in the name of Allah, but the personal struggle against sin and temptation. In calling for university presidents to be fired for not responding to fictitious crimes and bizarre incidents, neo-progressives externalize this religiosity in an effort to signal their virtue. The cult of the monad has, of course, already developed an answer to snide liberal rights activists such as myself, who would argue that there is no patriarchy, or that women have equal rights to men, or that racism doesn't play anywhere near as large a role in the plight of the black community as it did a few decades ago. Yeah. They have constructed the concept of unconscious bias, prejudices that people carry and act on without ever being aware of. Without a shred of self-awareness, they assume whites carry microaggressions and privilege while decrying the belief that race carries inherent positive or negative traits. This is, in my opinion, the most insidious aspect of third-wave feminism. They aren't the first religion to push the idea that man is born into sin and that it takes a particular faith-based ideology to cleanse the individual of it, but they are the most recent to rise to power. Catholics have Original sin, Scientologists have body thetans, and neo-progressives have unconscious bias. They are all referring to the terrible, terrible problem you didn't know you had that can only be solved by living your life precisely as dictated by the collective. And these ideologies are especially poisonous, as adherents so easily make the jump to seeing the unsaved and unclean as irredeemable and, ultimately, subhuman. That's why it's so easy for a neo-prog to get so unbelievably nasty and venomous on social media. When they politely remind you to check your privilege, and you refuse to genuflect at the altar of the holy victim, you become a heretic, and you mark yourself as a servant of the Demiurge. You deserve to lose your job if you hop on Twitter and tell a feminist she's wrong. And whether or not she's wrong has nothing to do with it. There is no in-between for these people. There is also no end in sight. Neo-progressivism is the political form of intersectional feminism, much like Islamism is the political manifestation of Islam. As such, neo-progs cannot help but to broaden the definition of words that turn people into victims of social systems. Words like racism, rape, sexism, and so forth are all synonyms for the Demiurge. The fact is that the entire realm of the senses has been corrupted, so it is not a stretch at all to say that everything is sexist, and that everything is racist, and that it's your job to point it all out. Neo-progressivism is driven by a cult that believes in a faulty, imperfect material world fashioned by a creator god they call the Patriarchy, and they see themselves as the light-bearing archons sent to lead the followers of the 5 pillars to the promised land, and whose holy duty it is to toss everyone else onto the great pyre of public opinion using the crucifix of the 21st century. The last time a new religion swept through Western civilization that decried knowledge as unholy, we saw a few hundred years of what historians refer to as the Dark Ages. Let's see if we can't do a little better this time around.